Inwards. There's one person on.
Let's just record it and make it on the same.
Making a neighbor's on.
Maybe they are just recording it.
So then why did they have to come in this morning then? I could have done it yesterday.
It depends on how busy the studio is.
Okay.
Because if it's another class, we don't keep it.
Yeah. It'd be nice to just know that, so I don't have to worry about the chat. So that's another thing I need to do. So that's fine, just learning because if it's a disaster, it's a disaster. Yes, of course. So it's 8:58. I mean, all of this. So now what?
So you're going to stop reflecting.
That was 8:58. Now.
No, when you...
Okay, so I'll click on it. I don't know.
I'm going to sit there and say, they can't see me.
And what's this? Oh, yes, okay. Are they recording the own copy? Right, almost ready to get going. Seatbelts on. In case of emergency, Those of you doing life of power, make sure you have your life belts, safety belts, what do you call those things? The life jackets. Choose your animal. If you choose a tiger, you can call him Richard Parker. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mr. Haggard from Rustenburg Girls High School, or William Haggard as it might say on my profile. I'm going to be taking you today through some exam skills for Paper 2 and Paper 3, specifically home language. On the database, I've uploaded 5 files, one of which is also the English first language exam preparation. I'm not doing first additional language. I'm not doing that today, but that is actually on the database, and you should, those of you who are doing that can use that particular specific material. So I'm going to be working through, as I say, I'm going to start with Paper 2. I'm also going to be referencing for Paper 2 the November past paper, 2020 paper that was marked early on this year, and then for Paper 3, writing paper, I'll be doing the past paper, one of the June papers from 2018, and as I say, these are just some exam skills. It's not here to replace the entire syllabus, or that you can now have use this instead of reading the books and actually doing the hard work that surrounds it. I'm going to be essentially using a lot of PowerPoint slides now, so we will go from that. So Paper 2. When we look at Paper 2, I just want to go over some really important sort of starting points, and what I'm going to do then is look at some poetry, the poetry essay, and then from there sorry, I was just interrupted there, sorry, my apologies for that. Section B and Section C. Obviously, when looking at Paper 2, there are a lot of different genres. Okay, so the 3 different genres, but there are a lot of different texts for the novel and for the drama. There are 5. So I won't be able to cover every single one comprehensively. I will give some material for Dorian Gray, or Picture of Dorian Gray, and for Hamlet. And obviously I'm going to focus, because there are more of you doing Life of Power, I wanted to focus a little bit more carefully on some aspects of Life of Power. So it's not just exam preparation, but also just to give some kind of things for you to work with also regarding the Life of Power text. So my apologies for the Dorian Gray viewers if you feel left out. I have included a little bit, but my mandate was to focus a little bit more on the Life of Power. And likewise for the drama, I was going to do something sort of more just for Hamlet, because many of you do Hamlet, but I've made it more general just to talk about aspects of the contextual and aspects of the literature essay. The literature essay I'm going to talk about sort of as either for Section B or for Section C. It can be either. Okay. We're just going to get started now. So, just a few things about answering techniques. Sorry, I was just interrupted again. There just seems to be... we're going to be working with the 2020 paper, and please can I ask that just a few things, just before we even begin. Please think about your layout in terms of how you approach your exam paper. So follow the questions preferably in the right order, and please indicate on the exam paper on the actual question number you've attempted, or question numbers that you've attempted. Okay. It really helps the marker to know where you're going, and so it saves time. This is one of those little things. The other thing is the issue of handwriting. Okay, work on your handwriting. Make your handwriting accessible, neat, large. Use black pen rather. That's my kind of preference. Remember that handwriting is a form of communication, and we need to be able to see what you're doing and what you're writing. So just that's the kind of thing that you can work on, handwriting size and so on. So we're not going to focus now any more of those kind of like things, but certainly let's just have a look now at some of the phrasal verbs. I'm going to run through them very briefly, because the kind of important that you can use as you got this on as a resource, but just make sure that you do understand the phrasal verbs. This is also important for the comprehension and for the language paper that you do. So account for, let's just have a look there. Account for, just very briefly, this you can always just refer to. It's a wonderful way of just understanding this. You've got to know the language. So give reasons or explain why things are the way they are. So discuss. And we get these kind of like discuss and critically discuss, and comment and critically comment. And so later on this next month, when I do paper 1, I'll also be looking again at phrasal verbs, but we do need to understand them and what that is about and so on. So when discussing something, it's kind of like you're entering into analysis. You're saying a little bit more than just like describing. Describing is like you're just stating what is. Discussing is giving a view, examining something, understanding it in a bit more detail. Okay. Compare and contrast. This is a common one. This is easy to work out. We're looking at differences and similarities. Okay. You're never really going to get something to sort of paraphrase, but certainly we often ask you to justify or back up or motivate or prove or substantiate. Okay. That's very, very important. Okay. Comment on, and this is very, very important. We're looking at you're looking at unpacking something a little bit more. This is often what like I do in my classes, and I think all teachers do this sort of, where we're looking at something a little bit more than just stating what is. So, for instance, let's talk about I don't know, I'm going to use the example of a rugby game I watched last week. That was the British Lions game in South Africa versus South Africa. So I could describe the game and say, yes, South Africa beats the British Lions, I can't remember the exact score now. Okay, and it was played in Cape Town. But if I'm commenting on it, I might say, but you know what, there was a lot of rough play, there was edginess, there was problems, there was discipline issues, and so on. That's commenting on it. I can also maybe come from another point of view and say, it was a spectacular game, I loved the way, etc. Okay, so that's when you're kind of like commenting on, and you're showing an appreciation and an understanding of it. Okay, so you need to make sure you understand the vocabulary in your contextual questions for poetry and for the either section B or section C that you specifically choose. Okay. As I say, when I do paper 1, I'll be revising this again, and it's something you should be familiar with and work with. When we look at effectiveness, we're looking at kind of like how it works in a bigger context, how it contributes to a sort of idea or an argument that is present in a poem or in let's say in Othello or in picture of Dorian Gray or Life of Pi, how a specific choice of word or an idea becomes more relevant. Okay? Evaluate. I haven't seen this appearing for some time in exam papers, but again, that's what you often are doing. You're looking at the merit, you're looking at not just understanding what the story is about or what the poem is about, but you're actually you're assessing it. You're coming in with a critical mindset. Okay, and this is often the biggest challenge for many students, is how do we put that together, how do we understand it, how do we make sense of it, and so on. And that really does come through sort of more critical reading, as we refer to. And then we've got this kind of like this adverb: critically discuss, critically evaluate, critically comment. And I don't want to kind of like give like definitions that we put in stone and that they are forever like that. I sometimes find that the phrasal verb or expression is critically discuss and critically comment, kind of almost, if you look at the memo answer, almost pulls out the same kind of answer. In other cases, it's more specific. Don't be threatened by that, and we always look at how you unpack an argument and show an insight. I think that's really what we want to do, is to kind of show like your understanding of something and your relationship with it, what you make of it, how you unpack it and interpret it, and so on. So these are quite like big things that you need to do that go beyond just the basic reading of the text. And for many of you, perhaps that is just the biggest challenge. I mean, if you think about it, Hamlet is 29,000 words long, more or less. Okay, and Life of Pi is, I haven't counted, but I mean it's also very, very long text. Picture of Dorian Gray is also, there are some very complex chapters with very dense vocabulary. How do we work through that too, and so on? And that is beyond the scope of today's lesson, but that's something that I can encourage you on, and so on. Okay, so. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look just briefly. So you argue the extent to which you agree, disagree. You often get this, especially for the literature essay. And so I will talk more about that when we get to section C, literature, when we look at the literature essay. And I've happened to put it around section C, but that doesn't mean that I'm saying that you have to do the essay option for section C. I've just included it at the end. Okay, but nevertheless, you often have to agree, disagree, and you might find that we almost look for a mixed response in many cases, where you are like kind of like understand the situation, but you have to like look at it a bit more or comprehensively and look at both sides, or understand that there's a counter side, especially when interpreting complex characters or complex situations. Even with a poem, there can be a range of ideas you can explore, especially with some of the poems. I think of the poem Vultures in that concluding stanza, that we can interpret sort of different approaches that the speaker may be trying to show us regarding the potential, or the, not potential, but the evil in human nature. Okay, critically evaluate. Again, you kind of, in all three things, you're looking at your own, developing your own conclusion, and then this critically comment. Okay, and this is probably a little bit more for the language paper, but we sort of say to you, start with I think that. Okay, I've got here, does the attitude hold? What is your take on the writer's argument? But we kind of like say, what is, like, let's just move this a little bit out of the way. What is your take? I think that the argument that Pi comes out good on the other side, is valid to an extent, and dot dot dot. And I explain why. Yes, he survives, but at the same time he is still unsettled in his life, and he feels this kind of there's this darkness that still exists in him, in terms of the nightmares that he has, and so on. So, and there are lots of interpretations, there are lots of views, viewpoints that we can bring into literature. And for some of you, you may enjoy that, engaging with a character and engaging with the text. And you often do that in class too. And I think that when we have the exam paper in front of us, okay, that shouldn't be the first time that you are looking at these sort of skills. It should actually be something that you should do in class as best as possible, or even with yourself, or you can with yourself. I sometimes have these internal debates about particular characters and their situations and so on, or with other people, with other, form a peer group, and you explore your characters and so on. And often that is what critically comment is doing. So it's a very formal way of expressing what do you think about that situation or that character's choice or this idea in a poem and so on. Okay, or if it's in a comprehension, whatever, but we're not doing that for today. I want to start by looking at poetry, and I'm going to focus on just a few important things for poetry. I can't cover every single thing, and I'm going to look at just sort of one or two question types and a little bit about the poetry essay. So the first thing is, and I say this to my students, is, and you should be familiar with the poetry essay. In other words, let's just have a look here, if I can just get out of this, and so let's just do it like this. Let's just go here. I'm using the 2020. So you should be familiar with the poetry essay, question 1. And perhaps a lot of you ignore it because it says poetry essay and so on. And I'm not going to try to sort of say that you have to do that. But what I like to do is you'll see that for each poem, for each poetry essay, they give you 3 things that you need to work with. And often it's not the same 3 things. It could be diction, imagery, and mood. It could be diction. It could be diction often comes up, but it could be punctuation. It could be etc., etc. Something specific to that poem also. And what I urge you to do is, let's just go back to this. There we go. And what I urge you to do is to try to prepare your poem. Each poem that you study, write detailed notes on kind of like apply the descriptors you would have for a poetry essay. Okay? And sort of have like little notes for each, diction, structure, imagery, tone, etc., as best as possible. Okay, it does require quite a lot of work, but actually it helps you to unpack your poem and for you to understand your poem a little bit more in depth. And you can apply this because you'll find that in the actual poetry contextual questions. So ignoring the essay question, there are similar questions at times about impact of a word, the impressions, imagery, tone, etc. So it's actually, the poetry essay and the contextual questions are somewhat aligned. They go together and it's similar sort of skills. Poetry essay is like answering a question on a longer level, but actually it's still 10 marks, 10 marks, 10 marks, 10 marks, till we get to the unseen, which is also 10, but that's different, you haven't seen the poem. And so on. In an earlier presentation, I did actually work with the unseen poem, and hopefully you have access to that. Okay, so let's have a look here. So I will say to my students, and I try to work with them in class, and I do detailed notes, and we look at and we unpack the poem accordingly. Just a note. This is not how we should in real life. I say real life beyond grade 12 and all of those kind of things. Approach poetry. Poetry is an expression. It's a shared, it's a perspective of the universe. It's an experience of poets sharing, of insight. And I don't know how many poets out there actually would want or would have wanted or even thought that their poems might be dismantled or taken apart or pulled apart like this. This is really just for NSC practice. Okay. In all of this, and one of the big things I find when I mark poetry, when we're looking at poetry for NSC finals, is that candidates don't understand what the poem's about. They don't understand the basic ideas. Okay, and that is really, really important, that you need to have a grasp of what is the poem or the poet or the speaker trying to share with us. What is that speaker's take on life? And often there might be like a certain set of questions or attitude or huge, like in First Day After the War, this wonderful ushering promise of optimism around a peaceful reconciliation after an oppressive past, and many students, justifiably so, relate that to the rise, the South Africa's transition into a new democracy in 1994. Okay, and see it like that, and appreciate it accordingly. But that's to understand what the poet is really trying to share with us. In the poem "Somewhere I've Never Travelled," the speaker's sharing this kind of like very complex element around a relationship that where one opens up and also closes up, the distance and that vulnerability and everything else. Understand what the poet is trying to say, and that can really, really, really help you to get to answering questions and so on. Okay. Very, very importantly, the emphasis is, if we look at the past few papers that have come out, there's an emphasis on technical features. So I'm going to talk a bit about technical features later on, and the kind of things that you need to be aware of, or to be focusing on in terms of poetry. You do need to not just understand the words, and I know that this is very difficult and complex, and it requires a lot of hard work, is just not just providing, I don't think it's just like, what does that word mean, but actually, what type of words is that poet using? And you need to sort of find, if you use the word murder instead of accident, murder has a lot more stronger connotations around something incredibly horrible and bad, whereas accident suggests it's not the person's fault. Okay, let's say in a car accident, okay, or something to that effect. So identify the type of words, and this requires a lot of hard work around that. We do need to understand that diction is not just the words, the type of words, what sort of words are connected and the like. Very importantly, imagery, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a later slide. Tone, we can talk about, and I'm pretty sure there are loads and loads of resources out there that include tone wheels and everything else like that. It's something I will focus more on also when I do the paper 1 presentation. So we'll look a little bit at tone today, just to understand that and to start working with that. I can't give out endless list of tone words, in itself, but that's something that are in many of the booklets that are provided for you. There are those tone wheels and understanding what tone is about. So I'll give 1 or 2 comments on tone, and we can just work. We're just to be mindful of that and to get an appreciation of the tone for each particular poem. I urge upon you that one of your important resources that you have is the NSC webpage, okay, that has past memos, and that all of those, there are, I shouldn't really be talking about the choices that are made and so on. I won't give any predictions of what I think will come up into the year, but you will find that every poem, I think, has been examined. It actually has been examined, and there are tone words and things that you can use in that to help you with that. Okay, so try again, when you unpack each poem, have words for tone. You may find that in many poems that there are 2 sets of tones, or 2 different types of tones that come through. So, for instance, in the poem "The Zulu Girl," there's a tone we can say there's an ominous, threatening, menacing tone towards the end. There's also an optimistic tone, that things will get better, things will improve. Then you might also feel that, like for instance, in the poem "Remember Me." Okay, now look at remember. The poem "Remember," and I'm going to be looking at that a little bit later on for poetry essay, and that the tone changes from being selfish and self-centered and scared and so on to more consoling and accepting and selfless. So I'll talk about that. Sometimes we have these shifts in tone, and so be mindful of that too, but aim to write detailed notes for for each as part of your preparation for the poetry exam. And attitude, I'll talk a little bit about attitude also when addressing tone and so on. It's the way a speaker approaches a particular situation. Okay? And so, and we look at that and unpack that and give you some ideas to work with. And then obviously what is also coming through is reader response. What is your view, or you get a question that says, how does this impact the reader? So you're going to actually use the words, the reader feels that, or the reader feels sympathy, or the reader feels challenged. So when you get a question that includes the reader, let's have a look here at an example of this from the 2020 paper. And here we have explain how the word tormented influences your response to the baby. So your response is reader response. So you should actually have some comment on my response is, or the reader feels. Let's carry on. Okay. Influences your response. This is with the poem A Hard Frost. Okay. 4.2, influence your response. So I'm not saying that that's always going to come up. We mustn't be mechanical and expect only certain questions. But again, look at what the question is asking and say, well, I need to unpack that. So how these lines influence your response. So highlight your response. I'm not saying I'm using this as an example of making sure and ensuring that you are working with the question in front of you. When I marked paper 1 a few years back, one of my moderators used this wonderful kind of idea of or not repeating the question, but making sure that you sort of involving the question. You use the question and you unpack and you're using the words of the question and taking that further, elaborating on that. Okay, and developing that. And I think that's very, very important because we want you, and can I just move this to the side a bit? We want you with these 3 mark questions specifically to be engaging a bit more, even with the 2 mark questions, okay, to really just unpack that and work with the question in front of you and read the question carefully. Let's go back to this. Okay. Apologies for that. So, poetry essay. So, I'm going to just refer briefly to the poetry essay and to talk about that. And this can be a popular option if you understand the poem and you see actually, you know what the poem's about, and you have a straightforward question around a particular idea. So, in the poetry essay for this year, there was, for the poem in Remember, the speaker undergoes a change of attitude toward her loved one. By close reference to diction, structure and tone, discuss to what extent you agree with the above statement. So, what change do you note in the poem? So, this must be stated in your introduction. I thought this was it's a kind of thing that I use as an example of a way of teaching the poetry essay. More fully in class. Okay, so we don't have time to do that today because I have to get through a lot of material. But certainly we see that you can, using a structured response in introduction, 3 paragraphs. So what would your 3 paragraphs be? Diction, structure, tone, and you write a bit about each one. Okay, with the topic in mind. Okay, so a lot of candidates understood that there is a change of attitude, and that was very pleasing to note. Okay, so you were able to access this, and so show in an introduction what the change of attitude is. Okay, and just generally, whenever you get a question for change of attitude, you have to say what the attitude was and what the attitude is now. I'm going to say this point now, I'm going to repeat it. And you might find that for today's presentation, I'm going to overlap a certain, some of the content and material, is that we never use the word positive or negative. For attitude, for tone, and, even for mood. I can't see how you can have a positive mood or a negative mood. but certainly for attitude and tone, we never use the words positive and negative. Okay? For science, you can use positive and negative, okay, cathodes and anodes for batteries, electroanalysis, but not in English for literature, okay, and for the language paper 2 on that note. You may use it, obviously, I suppose, if you need to in paper 3, but that we will look at later on. No positive, no negative. We do not credit any answers around that. That is too vague. It is far too limited to say that. So you need to make sure you've got tone words for each poem. Okay, and you can access those also from the NEC webpage, because the memo answers, often there are questions around tone. Be careful, however, that for a specific line in a poem, the tone might be a bit different to what you have in the NEC, in those whatever. So don't just learn that without applying it, but at least have this as part of your vocabulary. Okay, so let's move on. Change of attitude. So in my introduction, I would just very briefly say there is a change of attitude. The poet goes from selfish to selfless. That's my introduction. Okay. Then what words does the poet, I probably should have had speaker, I still sometimes say poet, used to convey a change of attitude. Excuse me. You don't need to quote endless words, but you did need to refer to some of the words, obviously, and we encourage you to use quotation marks, okay, and remember that a quote in itself is just a quote. So you do need to show an understanding of those words, elaborate, maybe even define this word which means, shows that. So you say the poet uses that word to show that she is scared. So we see that there's a lot of, for instance, in diction, in the poem Remember, and let's just have a look at the poem again. So I'm just trying to let it go. In the poem Remember, the speaker in the first part of the poem uses a lot of pronouns around I and you. Okay, I, remember me, I, me. And then it changes to you, and you. She focuses more towards her loved one rather than just necessarily herself. That's a very good discussion. Okay? There's a lot more references to remember me, remember, but actually letting go in the second part with forget. There's a calmness coming through. Okay? So you don't need to kind of like explain every single line, but those are just some guiding points around diction. The euphemism on the silent land, for instance, like not accepting it, showing a difficulty around it. And then we have that darkness and corruption. It's almost extreme now. I accept it, and this is going to be really cruel, and it's just going to take everything away. Don't think about that. So we have that movement away. Okay, so again, you don't need to give endless examples, okay, but just show an understanding of what diction is. What type of words? What is the speaker doing? What certain words come through? Okay, and that is really what we are looking for. And that should get you the kind of marks that you want, which is to do really well, and so on. Okay. Let's go back to, sorry, I'm just moving around here. Let's go back to there we go, okay. The structure of the poem. So, yes, just with regard to, and this should be also an examiner's feedback, okay, for this paper, and for any feedback, I imagine it's the same sort of thing, not just this year, but for previous years, when structure is referred to and it's a sonnet. Specifically a sonnet, but that's not the only kind of, there are a few sonnets that we find in the poetry syllabus this year, okay? But you can't just say it's a sonnet. It's an Italian sonnet or a Petrarchan sonnet. It's 14 lines and it goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da, whatever, and so on. That doesn't get marks by just describing the sonnet. In other words, we say, don't just look at something in isolation. This is similar to the diction discussion also. Okay? You don't just quote words. So you need to say, well, what does the poet do with the sonnet? And this is basic in the sense that the sonnet isn't just to have 14 lines of rhyme scheme and so on. It's not just a 14-line poem with the rhyme scheme rhythm, rhyme scheme division, and break into two parts, in this case octave and sestet. But what happens in the octave and sestet, and it's a very specific thing, is this shift that occurs. Okay? Sorry, let's just go there. We talk about the volta. Okay? And unfortunately today I can't spend a lot of time teaching the sonnet structure, but you need to understand what the sonnet structure is doing. Why the sonnet structure? To show that kind of movement and shift. Okay? And it's highlighted by words like yet. And so on. I'm going to talk more about the shift a little bit later on. Okay, also when looking at technical features. Let's go there. And tone, again, not negative, positive. And we can just use mournful to comforting. We even accepted, I think we encourage you not to use words like sad, because sad is a very general, sort of description. Try to find more words that are potent rather than just words like sad and happy. Okay? I would imagine in the poem First Day After the War, the people are happy. They're celebrating. They're just expressing these loud cries of joy and everything else. Not just happy. Okay? Or in Funeral Blues, the poet isn't just sad. Okay? He's devastated. So try to up the game regarding the use of the word sad. Okay. Quickly, this question often comes up, and I just wanted to go back to the poetry comment on the appropriateness of the imagery in the context of the poem. This is a very common question. I'm not saying it's going to come up end of this year, but imagery is something that is part of what poetry is about. So you do need to understand that. It probably should, in some way or another, you might have an image question. That seems to be part and parcel of what poetry is about. Remember, poetry is a shared experience using often figurative language and to show to use language creatively to bring about an idea or an argument or develop an attitude or etc. etc. Let's look at the next one. Yes. Okay, so now we've got attitude toward the frost. Okay, so that's different. But then we've got imagery coming up here. So imagery again in one way or another. Just looking at the 2020, and this does come up in other papers too. Okay, let's see, is there anything? There we go again. Comment on the effectiveness of this image in the context of the poem. So it's a common question. Okay, and it does occur elsewhere, and I have found that candidates often struggle with this. And when we look at image, you need to understand that it is figurative. It invites a more metaphorical association. Maybe the use of personification, okay, the use of metaphor, simile, etc. Okay, we use language more figuratively, or there's a figurative sense coming through. And unfortunately, it's not good enough to say that it's a metaphor comparing this to that, or in the poem First Day After the War, again referring to that quite often today, frequently is our freedom is personified as a woman. That's probably not enough to say. You need to say a little bit more about the idea that is being expressed and communicated. So, for instance, in William Blake's The Garden of Love, when describing the priests, okay, in their black gowns, doing their rounds, okay, what image? So, we say they are like prison warders patrolling, or that's a common answer, okay? Well, there's a sinister, upsetting feel given to them. Okay, once we start talking, not they are just at a funeral service. That's not even literal, that's wrong. Okay, because we know it's not a funeral service, but when it's a sort of a very literal discussion, then we know then you're not discussing image. And I found often that I only can start marking or circle off or bracket off when I start to see a figurative idea being explored, an abstract idea rather than just it's a literal kind of thing happening. Okay, so for instance in the poem The Zulu Girl, when it describes the storm, let's have a look at that now, just as by way of example, where we, sorry, just multiple screens. The ocean is full of songs for an African elegy. Okay, so let's have a look at that, for instance. African elegy, we have miracles that God made, ... So with this poem, the ocean is full of songs, and it's actually, there's so many possible image connotations that come through this. You can't say the ocean, the waves crashing, the ocean crashes, the waves crash and makes a lot of noise. Okay, that's literal. Okay, but once you start talking about songs like joyful and harmonious and perhaps complex, resonate, and then we start to talk about the image. Okay, and likewise, let's go to comment on the imagery in the context of this poem, the sharp electric clicks. Wow, in this, where was it? This line, this is line 7 and 8, yes. Okay, so, let's go there. While his sharp nails in slow caresses rules, prowl through his hair with sharp electric clicks. So if you say just literally, she's caring for him, whatever, there might be marked with a caring, caressing idea. Remember, already you got caress, so you can't use the word caress, my apologies. But we might want to say that she is like a lioness protecting her offspring. You might say it's too animalistic, and saying that it represents her in a very, we find a problem with that degradation around which she is described. And once you start to unpack what the connotations, what the image is, then you are closer to getting to unpacking image. Okay, and it says in the context of the poem often, and that is what you need to do in the context. Okay, in other words, how this works in the poem, and so on. So this nurturing but protective stance is taken, and to show the image, not just she is taking out ticks in his hair. That's literal. Okay, you need to unpack the idea around that. Okay, so let's continue. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, final slide. Tone, the way in which something is said or expressed. We avoid overused words like sad, happy, not positive, negative. I've done this before elsewhere, and so on. Okay, I will see if I need to do tone rules and things like that for paper 1. But I understand that can be located in your booklets elsewhere. Attitude obviously refers to overall stance or approach. Technical elements. Okay, so make sure you understand even things like the title, like the poem Funeral Blues. What does the title Funeral Blues convey about what to expect in the poem? An African elegy. Why is it called an elegy? Understand what the word elegy means. Okay? The poem Vultures. Why vultures when the focus shifts to kind of like horrors of Commandant Kramer, my German is horrible, at Belsen Camp. Okay, and look for the repetition of a word. That's often important. Okay, they like to ask those like more technical understandings. Why is the poem repeating a certain word? Okay, and the like. This aligns with some of the questions you find even in advertising and elsewhere. So make sure you're aware of how language is being used. Okay, punctuation is sometimes completely like in the poem Somewhere I've Never Travelled. How punctuation is used deliberately for a certain effect. Okay, even when we talk about run-on lines, enjambment, and deliberate pauses in the line, caesura. Okay, how that's, like in the poem Felix Randall, we've got both run-on lines and deliberate pauses to show a certain break and ... Okay, deliberate technical elements, rhyme scheme and rhythm, okay, is very important too. How that works and how that develops. The shift in a poem, okay. In other words, the kind of like the movement, and this is very, very important. Identify as far as possible in your poems how a poet develops an idea, and that's often, we'll often find it in the final stanza or towards the end of the poem, and this obviously in some poems, like in Felix Randall, line 9 shows us. Likewise in the poem Remember, line 9 also shows that shift if it's in a sonnet. Okay. Elsewhere, look for how a poem develops its argument and so on. Okay. And the shift. And note that you are often asked, like for instance in the Unseen poem, when it says in the poem as a whole, you need to show that there's a movement, there's a change of attitude, something new has happened, and we find it, and look for keywords like but, yet, however, and look for those sort of things. I refer you to also the presentation I did at the beginning of this year for the Unseen poem, where I've spoke about the shift. Okay, moving on to section B, novel, and with this presentation I'm probably going to be a little bit more than an hour for paper 2, but that's fine, I think, because there's a lot of stuff material here that we're going to cover, and then we'll go from there straight into paper 3. Obviously, and we say it again and again, and every time we mark matric papers and so on, we see the same thing coming through. So, if you are using this presentation, and if you are committed to furthering yourself and everything else around that, the film version of your text needs to be avoided. It can supplement at a later stage your broader understanding, but there are too many differences, too many changes, and so on. Both Dorian Gray and Picture of Dorian Gray and certainly Life of Pi, where there are a lot of differences, and so on. We do not credit film interpretations, and your markers are familiar with both and can recognize when the film is being used and when the novel is being used. Explore main ideas around, obviously, just basic literature analysis for the novel setting, plot, narrative. You do need to understand the story as per the text. Okay, what kind of conflicts emerge, and we use the traditional protagonist-antagonist. What kind of internal conflicts? What conflicts does Dorian Gray face, for instance? What conflicts does Pi face? Sometimes those conflicts are emotional and inner, and that's how we explore literature too, these kind of like real complex situations. Or Hamlet, or Othello, okay, or John Proctor, or Reverend Hale. What conflicts, and how do they overcome those kind of conflicts? Okay, understanding the character development and responding to a character. Grade 12, this also is relevant. I'm looking now for section C, understanding your complex, tragic heroes and tragic figures. Okay, how do we respond to that character and that character development? How a character changes? Can we have sympathy for that character, and so on? Okay, sympathy is how we relate to a character. Can we relate to that character situation? So in the novel, we've got two main big characters, sort of main characters or protagonists, if you may, Dorian Gray and Pi. Do we sympathize with them? To what extent do we sympathize? Or can we understand, or are we put away from that, and so on? Okay. And important symbols are necessary. So in Dorian Gray, obviously understanding the yellow book, in Life of Pi, understanding the role of the animals, the story, and even things like the whistle. There are lots. Okay, make sure you understand those important symbols and the like. Obviously in Dorian Gray, flowers are important symbols. There are loads. Music, etc. Okay. And then how those become important themes and the like. Okay, I don't have the time to unpack every single aspect of these things for your novel. Okay, these are just exam tips. So some pointers just very briefly for the Picture of Dorian Gray. Understand the setting. Okay, you do need to understand very comprehensively around Victorian aristocratic society. Understand your characters and their situations, okay, and so on. And I asked this question for Dorian Gray: is he to blame for his tragic outcome? And to get I think he is. The text weighs heavily towards that. However, you may even say completely, but try to find moments where he doesn't, where we can say, that there are external influences. He's a product of his environment. He does try to change, etc. Okay, so don't just read your character in a single particular box. Okay, the picture of Dorian Gray, contextual. These are just some past questions. I'm just going to rush through this. You got this in your as a resource in any case. Tone, attitude, mood, characters and influences. What kind of things influence Dorian Gray? That's very, very important. You need to understand Dorian and the various, like Basil, Sybil, the kind of forces of good, if you may, Sir Henry, Lord Henry at least, and others, the Yellow Book, and matters of the soul, art, the role of art. Again, this is background setting, understanding the kind of context in which Dorian Gray. Look for irony before, after. Often you have the phrase in light of later events, and this can reward you if you know the story and you know the kind of like what happens. You understand the later conflicts with Dorian Gray and James Vane, for instance. You can be rewarded for an understanding of the novel and the inside. Setting is totally critical, and obviously Dorian's ultimate moral degeneration and the role of the picture in it, and his responsibility. Is he responsible for his actions? Let's move on to Life of Pi. What I want to do with Life of Pi is just talk about past exam sort of questions and tips, and I've just included a little bit extra on sort of just how to look at 2 chapters. And I've also the Blind Frenchman chapter and the Algae Island chapter. Just 1 or 2 pointers on that, and then also some do's and don'ts, okay, around all of Life of Pi. So obviously you need to understand Pi's polytheism, his love of science. The film version has at least 32, in my opinion, more vain departures from the novel. Okay, there are too many, and there's not enough in the film version in any case on the second story. Okay, and the Blind Frenchman, even the 2 Mr. Satish Kumars, and so on and so on. You've been told in telematics presentations and elsewhere, avoid the film version. I'm not going to mention that again. Both stories need to be understood. You need to understand chapter 99, and you need to understand the events of what happened in part 2, and try to make sure you've got an understanding for each, and the actual, like the actual story itself, the actual story, make summary notes on it. Understand the role of Pi's experiences in part 1 that shape his ability to survive. This is really, really important. There are a number of experiences in part 1, and you will often get this kind of question because there's a relationship between part 1 and part 2, and obviously part 3. Okay, so what kind of experiences? Well, Pi's from his swimming. I mean, I don't go too far with that, but yes, you can swim there's something there, obviously. There's also, obviously, he's growing up in a zoo. What his father teaches him, the lesson his father teaches him with Mahisha the tiger, and obviously his role of just his insight into zoos and love of biology from his Mr. Satish Kumar's biology teacher. His love of religion, or not just love, his choice, his religious choices he makes to enhance a personal faith system that he has, and. Small things regarding Life of Pi. I've included this because we need to just look at them, and I think these appear in study guides and so on. And if you have an issue with some of them, and you feel strongly, or your teacher has encouraged a certain thing, then that's fine. I'm giving my opinion, but I think that the following is for me not adequate or suitable enough, or in some cases inaccurate. Okay. Mahisha the tiger in chapter 8 versus Richard Parker in part 2. Okay. Richard Parker is referred a few times in part 1. We're not really told that it's a tiger, okay, or whatever we learn in chapter 99, okay, the alter ego explanation and so on. Okay, but the tiger in chapter 8 is Mahisha. It's different tiger. It's a small thing, but you're not showing a complete understanding by marrying the two. Okay? Spicy food as the better story. I don't know. I think about that. The author sees the food as being spicy. The author doesn't like curry. Pa grows up Hindu. He likes that. I don't see that as necessarily, and I think that is in Spark Notes or whatever. I don't see that as necessarily like it's the better story. I'm not convinced by that personally. I think that he likes a lot of food because it's what he went through. So there's an abundance of food. Yes, spicy, it's robust, and it's whatever, but he grew up eating that kind of food. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but I just feel I'm not convinced by that in itself. It's not a central idea in any case in the novel. Better story is about the story is the animals or the story is the humans, and so it goes with God. I think that's what storytelling is about, as opposed to dietary and nutritional things. But that's my point of view. I don't know about this orange cat being Richard Parker. Okay, that also comes up. I think orange is the color of survival, and the story has a happy ending, and the cat is part of the family, and so on. It's a coincidence. Maybe you feel that this is connected to Richard. I can't see it. It's happy and it's domesticated and so on. Orange is more interesting for me, however. Okay, the three wise men are not Pa's religious mentors. Pa's religious mentors are Auntie Rahini, Father Martin, and Mr. Satish Kumar, his Sufi. Okay, not his Imam that he talks about later on, and not the other two male men. Okay, so Auntie Rahini and Father, whatever. So I dispute this. I don't know where this is coming from, that the three wise men. I think it's kind of like not showing enough of a real solid understanding of the text. And Pa does not please great children. Whatever you make of the orange cat and the spicy food, okay, and so on, I need to emphasize he does not become atheist. He does not abandon God. Okay, I know there are chapters where he doesn't refer to God, but it's not a good reading to say that he abandons. I think the film version encourages this God had forsaken me. It's not in the text. Pa says to us a number of times, he follows Salatans. He says to us, he turns to God in suffering. He has, and so on. It comes through very strongly in the novel as a whole, in part 2 as a whole. Many chapters show that actually his faith is actually not just left behind, but strengthened. That is now an understanding, please. He does not become atheist, okay, or anything close to that. We can have moments of doubt, but that doesn't mean that and I don't know where the text is as a metaphor for his doubts or whatever. I'm not satisfied with that. Okay, please. This part 2 is actually, if you read the last few chapters, it's about strengthening of faith. Okay, the quotes are there. I'm going to talk about that now in a moment. Understand clearly the difference between the two stories which are said. Again, you're not being assessed on the film version. Okay, these are just sort of past questions that we've found. I've unpacked for you, and so on, and you can work through and make sure you understand these sort of topics. Okay, how Pa learns to survive, Pa's knowledge of animals, the specific animals in the novel as a whole. But please, the novel as a whole means you have to include the other story. You have to include both stories. So put simply, with with Richard Parker, it's both the companion ... and the emphasis on and his will to survive and protection to this, and those sort of things, and alter ego. Okay, it's very, very important. Novel as a whole. Okay, just a few things. I just need to include just one or two guiding points, because I think many students and so on readers struggle to make sense of this. I'm going to just give you one or two ideas to work with. This is an extra, and so it means that I'll run slightly out of time for the paper 2, but I need to include this. Chapter 91 helps the reader to interpret the essence of chapter 90. 90 is the blind Frenchman chapter. And to reread it after reading chapter 99, the other story. It's a short chapter, but it's about Pa's turning to cannibalism. Okay? Or a moment of cannibalism. This harmonizes with what we learn in chapter 99, the other story with the French cook and so on. Blind Frenchman, French cook, and you start to unpack whatever. I'm not saying the blind Frenchman is the French cook in itself, but just see what similarities to help you understand it. Remember, we're not given a complete version. We will always have that sort of open to possible ideas and so on. And that's great. That's fine. That's what you need to understand over. Just to help you with the reading. What does Pa need to sacrifice in order to survive? This is an essential question. And he sacrifices a lot. And he also unpacks his killer instinct. And remember in chapter 99 it says, I discovered evil in others and worst of all, in me. I discovered it in myself. But brief, very brief. Look at the Algae Islands. Very, very brief. Whether or not the island actually exists will never be proven beyond what Pa tells the reader. So we're sort of left with that. Okay? Maybe what the island could represent? And I'm going to give you one idea. There are lots of others. Pa initially doubted what he saw. He then believes. The topic of taking a leap of faith is essential to the story as a whole. Okay, so that's the one thing about he then believes. So that's the opening part of the Algae Island. I'm interested in accepting the better story that relates to that. Perhaps we, the reader, have to accept that too. But the Algae Island closes the last page of the chapter 92 and the short little paragraph chapter that follows. I think helps me to locate the following. We see that this island provides Pa with material comforts, a false sense of safety and security. Ultimately, he learns that the island is dangerous. Yes, he can restore himself or whatever, but he realizes he needs to go back to the real world. Living in comfort does not strengthen Pa's faith. It becomes a shallow faith, as he says. So maybe returning to the real world with all its struggles, and indeed this journey of hardship, is more meaningful. And that is the difficult thing. Pa realizes his suffering is necessary in order to prove and test his faith. He knows then, if he continues to turn to God despite, and this is what chapter 93 says to us, is that I turn to God despite everything else. And I think for me, the Algae Island brings in that as a sort of a set of ideas. We want to look briefly at section C now, and I'm going to just put this out there. This is a breakdown of the common questions that we have found, the characters' relationships with each other and others, their attitudes to each other. What sort of redeeming qualities can we find? So think about, for instance, Othello. Can we find redeeming qualities? Are there moments at the end of the play? Or Hamlet? Okay, are there redeeming qualities? Even Claudius, there's a moment we can say he's not completely evil, but we can obviously, when he talks about the burden this has on his conscience and so on, he realizes that it does bother him, and that's not pure evil then. Okay, ... Character analysis. Note at this stage of the play how something uttered or described typifies one's character. So understand how at this stage of the play. People really think that the contextual questions are fair, and be careful of just choosing the Hamlet essay because you haven't read the novel, you haven't read the play, you've only watched the film, so you decide you're only going to do it as an essay and so on. Because the essays are actually very complex and so on, especially for the drama. Make sure if you can get there to the contextual can reward candidates very nicely. Okay, plot-based in light of later events, key moments based on your knowledge of the play as a whole. Okay, understanding situations and the characters and like how Iago manipulates others around him, Rodrigo, Cassio, Othello, Desdemona, Propentia, ... and or Hamlet's, before, after what we find later on in the play. There's lots of stuff there, and so on. Or Elizabeth, she evolves as a character in Crucible, and. Okay, Very importantly, you need to understand the stagecraft. Again, understanding of internal motivation. What's their kind of like their motives, their state of mind, how they're feeling. Okay. The extent to which it would be justifiable for an audience member to feel pity for a character. And this is at this point in the play. I've got their Hamlet to feel it, but obviously there are other characters in other plays, how we can feel sympathy for them at this stage of the play. It's often quite a complex question. We can say yes, but, or no, but. In Othello, we can feel sympathy in parts of Act 3, and then our sympathies are removed. Obviously, where how he destroys Desdemona emotionally, and when he strangles her, murders her later on in the play. Dramatic irony, the full significance of a character's words, and remember to include the word audience. Okay. Dramatic impact, intended or expected, or expected reasonable impact on the audience. Always refer to the audience when you get dramatic impact and dramatic irony. Director's notes, body language, tone, motivation. 1 mark for each in context. Make sure you refer to body language, and always try to say a bit more than just pacing up and down the stage, but try to show some sense of action and plausible movement. Tone, again, the way it's said, and remember to include motivation. Why? And again, this is a bit difficult. Sometimes students struggle with this, but it can also reward you and the like. And then obviously you need to understand, just as part of the play, what a soliloquy, a side, monologue, stage direction is, especially also when they talk about stage directions for the Crucible. Okay, they often ask that the impact of the stage direction and the like. But we have it in Hamlet. Hamlet walks in reading a book. What does this tell us about Hamlet? And. Okay, irony, often there's a deeper significance. Use the words however, but, okay, and so on. Mini essay, you often end off on a major theme. There are lots. I've just given some from more that we find in the 3 plays, but there are loads of themes. And try to, if it says, use this extract as a starting point, compare text A and text B. Okay, just a little bit about the essay. This could be an entire lesson on its own, but make sure, look at this idea of, can I just move there? Sorry. Look at this idea of developing the arguments, okay, and structure, introduction, conclusion, and so on. So you need to, we emphasize structure and the development of the arguments, and rather than just mere storytelling, or even just, these strange creative responses and so on. You try to use the words of the topic in a structured development should help you to push you into this area at least, okay? And we encourage you to be focusing on that regarding this. So I'm just going to finish off with looking at structure, the PEEL method. Okay, introduction, signposting, agree, disagree. What topics will you be exploring? Show an engagement with the topic. This is critically discuss the extent to which you agree. Show that the statement is partially valid or completely valid or whatever. Okay? Especially for section C, but it could be for Dorian Gray, it could be for A Life of Pi, depends on the question. I often use this with my students, my learners. A mixed response, is a thorough response. In other words, you're going to have more meat and more things to work with if you look at both the sort of, sometimes there's a greater complexity. You cannot put characters into a single box. Okay. Developing your main paragraphs, topic, sentence, elaboration, with supported examples, link to the topic, and so on. Conclusion, wrap up your main arguments. Okay. That leaves me for the literature. I'm going to move shortly now to the paper 3. But again, your marker has read the texts thoroughly many times. Okay, don't insult your marker by just repeating the story. Okay, aim to use the words of the topic and try to formulate arguments of your own, and make every attempt to engage with the topic. And that will be that for paper 3. Okay, for paper 2. Now to paper 3. Okay, so paper 3, let's just analyze that. So for paper 3, we know that there are different types of writing that we expect you to do: narrative, descriptive, discursive, argumentative, reflective. Okay, so we know this. So I'm just going to give you some tips from examiners. I'm just going to read through some of these ideas, and then there will be a teaching activity that you can do. But I will ask you to, when you're using this, if you're using it as a YouTube video, if this is live streamed, then just bear with me. But I do need to cover a lot, and I included a little bit from paper 2 just to so we sort of slightly ran out of time there. Okay. So some tips: analyze, interpret the entire topic. Topics are multi-layered. Okay, don't focus on one word or phrase in the topic. Okay, if you're uncertain about an aspect, choose another topic, something that speaks to you. Again, underline all key words in the topic, especially for section B. Okay, there are often like specific instructions that you're given, and work through section B writing for section B. So what kind of like specific things do you need to do? So this is very, very important, because often what happens is that candidates lose marks, or they haven't followed all aspects of the topic. Okay, they only focus on one side. So if it's like a formal letter with a problem and a solution, you write only about the problem, but you haven't included the solution. You cannot, even if it's the best like development of a problem in the world, it's like just perfectly written, and we look at this and we can't like fault it in any way. You haven't included a solution, unfortunately you can't get all the marks. Okay, so choose the topic most suited to your experience, ability and style of writing. Okay, remember your first idea might be everybody's idea too. So try to, and if we had more time to look at like paper 3, writing skills, this is something I focus on a lot more carefully, is try to look for more than one approach towards a topic. And if you think that there's a normal way, or like the first response is probably what others are going to have to you. Okay, remember it's NSC, the entire country, so you might view something similarly to what a lot of others will too. But again, so just be careful of that. The best writing is when there's just this wonderful development of an original idea. And I'm going to talk more about this idea of your experience and so on, and making what we call authentic writing and so on. And this allows for the best writing. So I'll be talking about that, giving you some insight into that a bit later on. Planning is important. Be careful of just writing out, however, and then rewriting, but you need to brainstorm. You need to show and have an understanding where your introduction is going, what your introduction is going to look like, your conclusion, the shape of the essay, and so on. You do need to spend a bit of time planning. That really, really, really is critical in this. Okay, there's lots of stuff here that you can use as your just to work with and so on. Sometimes your ability to think out of the box can help you, even if your language ability is not very good. Editing is very important at the draft stage. Cross out your draft. Do not retell. This is quite important. Originality. Okay, rather write from your point of view, your life, and so on. Write about where you are at as 18-year-olds, more or less, 18, 19, 17, that sort of age. Okay, write from like your world. And I say to my students, the night before, watch an interesting film, or I say don't read a film. I mean, bring that film in, but kind of like be mentally prepared. Listen to some good music, okay, classical music. Listen, watch, and think about, spend some time by yourself and kind of like create like this little mental suitcase of your life experiences, where you wanted to go, what challenges you have, what things were successful, what difficulties, and wow, there are a lot of difficulties these days, more so than in the past, in my view. And so what kind of things where you, often those make for the paper 3 markers are sometimes very moved by these real, genuine, sincere, authentic responses that add value to the topic. Okay, I must emphasize that you don't need to try and write something like Life of Pi or, the biggest, best story ever, whatever. No, just write from where you're at and so on. And I think that is really, really an important space to occupy. Just a few things. Don't include the title of the topic as introduction. This is also relevant for paper 2 literature essay. And so on. The structure is always important. And this, if there's one thing I can leave with you today for paper 3 writing for section A, is the introduction and conclusion. Make sure they go together. Okay? Maybe I'll have an opportunity to do more section A writing later on in one of these sessions and so on, and this is something I would focus on very carefully. Okay, your introduction and conclusion must harmonize. So if there's, as I said, there's anything you're taking, authentic writing, right from yourself, right from your worldview, and that introduction and conclusion. They must go together. Okay? I'm not going to spend too much time on language skills and so on. That is actually a very separate lesson here. But here we have authenticity and sincerity. Okay? We want you to write from your worldview and from where you're at. We understand this is your world and you're sharing something of that rather than necessarily just kind of like writing, kind of recreating some sort of storyline plot or anything else around that. Okay. I see here also again poor handwriting can affect the assessment of your response. Okay. Let's have a look at this, and if you are live streaming, you're just going to have to bear with me, but YouTube, you can just pause. Yeah, okay? And I want you just to look and pause for a moment and just look at this topic. In the depths of winter, I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer. So you can pause here and then just have a look and underline the main words that you find and how you think you could go about interpreting this topic. Give yourself a few minutes just to work through this. Okay. I finally learned that in me there was this invincible summer. Obviously, for live streaming purposes, I want to cover a lot, so I'm just going to carry on, but again, my apologies for that. So, the kind of thing that you might have focused on, we'll see that winter, cold, bleak, summer. What does the word invincible mean? It means that I can't be broken. And we sometimes have this association of winter as being something connected to death, or something really bad, or being the odds are against you and so on. So let's look at what we could. So maybe the responses are around overcoming adversity. Okay, overcoming really, really difficult situations. Okay, it can be literal. So last winter I had a really tough time, but now it's summer and I'm liking the weather and I feel a lot better. Okay, so I feel healed and restored and so on, and that can be a really good answer. But I think again, if you look at that, this can be a bit more figurative, and you can unpack that and develop that more carefully. It can benefit you and so on. My advice is again, look at past papers, look at what the kind of questions are asked and what are examined in those particular questions. Okay, so that's just one quote and so on that we can look at, and it is from the 2018 paper that I'm going to be using. If I can just pause there and then just go to this particular one we're looking at. This is to minimize that a bit. And I'm looking at the 2018 paper, and I think that there are some really good questions. There are always good questions in all the paper threes, but there are, and you can see that there are some questions that are more argumentative, discursive, reflective, discursive, and And again, be careful of a quote. And again, here's a quote. This is the quote, in the depth of winter. So if your essay only focused on winter, and I didn't really get anything to do with summer, okay, then unfortunately, and it can be really well written, but unfortunately it's not going to get all the marks, and we can't assess it, give it the writing may be very good, but if you haven't developed all aspects of the topic, you cannot get all the marks. Okay, I want to move on now to picture response, and I'm going to be using the following three, let's just move that out of the way, 3 pictures, okay, and if you look at that, refer to that picture and you'll see carefully at what type of shoes, and so on. Okay, that's the one picture we're going to be looking at. Here's another picture. I'm going to call this the shoes picture. I'm going to call this the barbed wire picture. There's lots of stuff happening here. And then the final one is, these are snails crossing over. Okay, so I want to look at those 3 pictures and to talk about picture response and the like. And I also wanted to give some ideas of what you can do to practice your own writing in preparation for paper 3 writing. Because I think that, again, if you practice and you work through past papers systematically like this and you develop interpretations, it's going to allow for better kind of writing, okay, ultimately, in terms of the interpretation of the topic. So let's just go back there, sorry, this is from the current slide. Okay. Referring to the visual stimuli options. So I like to teach from using visual stimuli because I think it just allows for such interesting creativity. Okay, so a few things that are important here. Don't be afraid to choose it because it just opens up many ways of interesting interpretation. You must give it a title. Okay, that's really, it says in the instructions, provide a title of your own. And sometimes what happens is candidates don't write, they write question 6, they don't say 6.1, 6.2 or 6.3, and they don't give a title. And they spend a lot of time trying to work out what the answer is, or which picture are you responding to. And if it's not clear at all, okay, and we don't know, sometimes just the title can show, you're focusing on that and developing that. And especially when your marker may have a lot of marking to do, you don't want to bother your marker. More specifically, that might just get lost in translation. Imagine that actually that was quite an interesting piece, an idea that you were expressing, but you didn't indicate that it was 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and you didn't give it a title, and you didn't help your marker to understand. Okay. So again, also, we don't want you to describe the picture. In the picture, I see a man walking or person walking with 2 different shoes. Okay? That is not what we need you to do too. Okay? Furthermore, don't focus just on one aspect of the picture. Okay, so let's just look back at the, I'll just go here, I've got in the second slide, so let's say here, this picture. Okay? Don't focus just on one aspect of the picture. So, I see that there are different types of plants. Possibly 2 different kinds of people, but we don't know. It's quite abstract, but I think it allows for some interesting ideas. Okay? So we've got here, so you decide you're going to write about, I'm trying to think of, you're going to write about your dream is to work at Edgar's and sell clothes. Okay? And you don't really mention anything here. And so, which is fine. I don't have a problem if that's your dream. I'm not insulting your dream. Okay? But I don't know if this is what we're really looking for in this picture. I don't think this is what the picture, I don't think that's going to be, in this case, probably the best response. Probably, I say probably, because I don't know what, I can't say that there's going to be an exact answer. If we look at this picture, okay, and I focus only on what is this in the background? It looks like some kind of, some sort of vertical structure. Maybe it's a tower of some sort. It can't be a tower. Maybe it's a pole. Yes, okay. Or I focus on, yes, here's a child. And I focus on the innocence of children. Okay, and I don't really get anything to do with this barbed wire fence or crossing over or support or, and barbed wire suggests kind of like quite, you can't just climb over barbed wire. Okay, it's also prickly, it's going to hurt you. So I focus only on just like, in my family, I've got a younger brother, and I really like my younger brother. I don't know if that's connecting to the whole picture. Okay, or floorboards. Okay, at our school we've got floorboards, and you miss the snails, or you write a topic on just on the snails ate all my father's plants. I hate snails. I don't know if that's really what this picture is just about. If you see what I'm saying, there's something else happening here about following and slow and so on. So try to focus on kind of like the whole picture and the essence of the picture. And again, there is nothing wrong with practicing looking at past papers and exploring different interpretations of images. And I say to my students, start with something that is, start with like an obviously wrong answer or a limited answer. So I do, like for instance, I'll choose this picture with my, let's say my grade 10 class, because I like to prepare towards grade 12. It doesn't just happen in the grade 12 year. And I show an image of a storm. Okay, so you can write a very, very good essay on like storm clouds and floods and so on, and that can happen. But maybe you can also write about storm as in like a stormy relationship. It sounds cliched, but it's at least a little bit going a bit more figurative and showing a little bit more relevance to it. And obviously wrong answer would be like just to write about rain when the image is a storm. Okay, you're only limiting to a certain part of the picture rather than the full picture, and so that's always important when we look at this. Again, also try to make sure that the picture that you're responding to is like fully integrated. And so there's another good skill, is the topic is developed throughout the answer, rather than it occurs in the first paragraph and we don't see it again. So let's say, for instance, I do this, I don't know, let's choose this topic. Okay. It was the first day of holidays, and we decided that we were going to explore an old building. We jumped over a barbed wire fence. Okay, that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is what the old building was like. Paragraph 3 is we had sandwiches, and then we played some, we played a game of soccer. Paragraph 4, touch rugby or something like that. Paragraph 4, we went home and we watched TV for the rest of the holidays. What's happened to this picture? Why did you forget about describing the picture and the idea in the picture? So make sure that you develop it fully. And this is like a really good skill, because this is part of the criteria around which you're marked is full attempt to answer the topic. Okay? And one of the key things in the rubric on which you assessed, and this is, you'll find in the literature paper too, is the topic, developing the topic fully. Okay? And I use those kind of like, strange examples, but if you think that, and if you agree with me, and you can see, hang on, I shouldn't have just spoken about school holidays. I needed to develop a full essay around something, around a theme here, or an idea here, and I use it more figuratively. Okay. And if you can see something, so for instance, like the shoes, and you can see that, maybe this connects to, I don't know, let's look at in South Africa, privilege. Okay. And circumstances. Okay. And and then you write an essay around privilege and dot dot dot. Okay, I'm just leaving it as open as that. Yeah, that can be a really interesting essay. So you're not like just talking about people wear shoes on different days and you're taking it quite literally. You've got a theme, you've got an idea, and that can be enough. We can see what you're saying, or to look at the world through different points of view. We can see, yes, shoes, yes, perspective, walk in those shoes. You can't just walk in shoes of comfort. You've got to know what discomfort is. There are lots of ideas that you can explore and work with. So use this and try to unpack the different ideas. Let's go back to this as an, wrong one. Apologies for that. And decide what the picture could suggest, what is in your mind. So you can do this for yourself. Again, same as the last, and I'll be sort of saying the same instruction. Pause if you're doing this as a YouTube video, and if you're live streaming, but you've still got the resource, just work through this more carefully, because we don't have hours just for you to sit back and work and so on. Okay, so again, what possible ideas? I've given a few things that you could probably have thought about as we go through. So you can pause, as I said, and then I called it the shoes picture. That's not the title. Make sure that your title is more creative than the picture of the shoes. Okay, that's not a title. That's just like saying which picture you're describing, which is not very original. It's not very interesting. Okay, I've just given it shoes picture, but you could give it your own title. So I've got here different shoes, wealthy versus poor. That's just one idea. Walking in one's shoes, empathy. Okay, and wow, if you suddenly get that idea, you can you could even talk about, in South Africa we've got such a divided nation in terms of structural unearned privilege. That's those brackets and things to which people belong. There's lots of stuff here you could actually touch into and tap into that you as 18-year-olds can work with. Empathy, lack of empathy. Okay? And it could again be narrative, it could be reflective, it could be argumentative. I'm going to say now, and I know that should my students ever watch this, they might say, oh no, but you always wanted us to try to go for a more don't mix the response and everything else. But for finals, we look at the essay in totality and what you're doing with it and so on. So it can be, again, and I've got your privilege and so on. I don't know, maybe you write a humorous story of fancy dress party, embarrassing moments, wearing the wrong shoes. That's very literal and probably it could be funny. Nothing wrong with that if you have that and you can work with that. But I don't know, you decide on how literal response might. I went to the shop today and I saw someone wearing 2 wrong shoes and 2 wrong pants. We laughed at that person. I don't know, that's how original is that, how exciting is that, how interesting is that. Okay. Your literature that you do, I don't think has such shallow kind of plots. Okay, if you look at it like that. We want you to be more open and interesting in the world around you. And again, I emphasize the following, is that as 18-year-olds, if you look at your oral activities and the choice of literature that you have and so on, and the topics that you cover in life orientation and elsewhere in history and in life sciences and in maths and so on and so on, we expect a pretty mature, sophisticated way of looking at the world. In the eyes of the law, as an 18-year-old, you are seen as a culpable adult. Not fully with all the rights as such, if you look at it 18 versus 21, but certainly you have voting rights, you have the right to use a car, you've got various other rights, and so on. And that right comes with the responsibility, and one of those responsibilities, I say, is that kind of maturity. So aim for, that's what we expect in your writing too. Okay, we expect you to have that kind of worldview of having read newspapers and understanding the world around you, interacting with the world, and so on. Not just, if I may say, watching YouTube, Minecraft videos, or whatever. Okay, something a bit more, and so on, is expected. So I've got here the shoes picture. I've got here the barbed wire fence picture. So perhaps borders, boundaries, overcoming boundaries. It's quite difficult to go over a barbed wire fence. It's difficult to go over certain types of boundaries in life, and so on, and obstacles along the way. There's lots. Overcoming challenges, etc. The snail's picture, just want to see how we do for time. The snail's picture, probably conformity, following what others do. You'll see that the small snail, if I can just go back to this here, the small snail becomes a bit bigger, it's maybe following your family's shoes or family footsteps. Okay? But why snails specifically? Okay, so, again, snail's face, getting there. I love that. Okay. You will get there. Progress. Perseverance will get you to the other side. Following the crowd also may get you, safe spaces and so on. So there's lots of things there that you could work through. Dedication despite obstacles. Okay. The next, what I wanted to conclude with in the next sort of 20 minutes or so is looking at section B writing. And I don't have, that's a separate thing where we look at all the formats and everything else, and it can be hours long, and we don't have that. So we expect you to have knowledge of the formats. There is so much material out there in form of booklets and other resources with format requirements and so on. And we need you to understand the formats. Okay, we need you to understand what that type of writing entails. And some of it is actually, in my opinion, is probably inaccessible. If you don't have access to newspapers, magazines, and those kind of things, or you don't read it, put it that way. It's not about access. Okay? It's about if you don't read a newspaper, you can't do a newspaper article. So that already just puts you down. I mean, you can try, and you might even, to use a colloquialism, wing it, but you're probably not going to, because if you don't know how a headline article works, okay, with the way information is put together, or a magazine article. So I'm going to say, just they're putting it out there, and this is something that you can even start practicing in your own time. I get my students to create like a workbook, okay, and to collect as far as possible examples of, you can go onto the internet, but you're not always going to get good examples. It is tricky. It's not something you can do immediately, but try to get some examples of what format, like, go to your teacher if you're unsure about the examples you have off the internet and so on. But you can get a newspaper, purchase a newspaper, get your parents to buy a newspaper, see if you can get a copy of, and look for the editorial. Look for letters to the editor, because sometimes that gets asked. And the editorial, my apologies, is when the editor writes a piece based on a set of opinions on topical issues. Letter of complaint, job application. You do these kinds of things in the LO. Letters, thanks, donation requests. If you at least understand those and you get these as topics, you can do something with them. Newspaper articles, magazine articles, obituaries and eulogies are quite, how do you get a eulogy? That's a speech, okay? You just make sure you understand them and so on. Just interestingly, from the film Four Weddings and a Funeral, some of your teachers may do that. There's it's one of the characters in that film, and it's a YouTube. It's about a minute long. Funeral Blues. One of the characters from that film reads out the poem, recites the poem, Funeral Blues. So it's an elegy, but in a funeral context, to a live audience, to an audience around that person, it's a eulogy. Okay. Make sure you know those kinds of things as best as possible, or at least to understand them. We always ask you to contextualize, and I always ask myself if I understand, like for instance, and I just want to add in something, there's something that I've left out here or got deleted. reviews. Film reviews, restaurant reviews, and the like. I'm just actually going to just type this in here. So, reviews. My apologies for that. Okay. It won't be film, restaurant. Okay. Let's just go back. Sorry, my apologies for that. Okay. So, reviews. Okay, and you can find some of these, access them, read them, make sure you understand them. Okay, and that's the best I can offer at this stage to understand the kind of writing that you're doing, and so real life writing. I ask myself, will this work in real life? Will this kind of can this be plausible? Would this be effective? Okay, and then if that's the case, it's going to obviously do well if the format requirements are met and the tone is correct. Okay, and I just want to talk very briefly about tone, because I just want to look at past papers. We have about just under 20 minutes. So I want to just look at those kinds of areas. So tone is very, very, very important. Think of a formal letter of complaint. Okay, the idea is not to be as rude and ugly as possible, insult the person, and so on. You're not going to accomplish much in any case. We are taught that in real life, that violence begets violence. Okay? And perhaps that's the kind of attitude we should have, at least when doing in section B writing. Tone and dignity. Okay? So the tone is also formal, as in aim for more formal writing. Okay? And you might say in a dialogue and the like that, that's kind of like, people are using colloquialisms and chatty and everything else. We still want you to aim for something a bit more formal rather than necessarily informal kinds of elements and so on. Okay, so make sure that tone and dignity is also respected, and so on. Again, your formats are really, really important. If you mix the format or you don't show the full elements around what you need to know for the format, then it does bring it down. And this is learning work. Okay? And there should be loads of resource booklets and things around there. I'm going to look into this too, to see for future presentations if there's extra stuff and extra material that perhaps I can also put in and so on for those who don't have at this stage of grade 12. So let's just have a look at, now I spoke earlier on about this, where are we? Sorry, my apologies. I just want to go back to, there we are. Underline all keywords, nouns, things that you need to do in a topic. And I'm just going to do that now with section B, and then we're going to look at some possible ideas around that. So we only have about 15 minutes left or so for this presentation, but obviously if you can use this YouTube and you pause and then I'll unpack some ideas you can look at for looking at the 2018 paper for section B. But I want to just kind of guide you through the following in terms of what I show my students and the way I unpack section B. Okay. So let's just have a look here. We've got here section B. Maybe I should just minimize it a little bit. Okay. That's the word lengths. I'm not going to say too much about that. I think again with word lengths, if I may, and hopefully your teachers don't get too cross with me, the only time markers actually count the words, the only rubric and thing that is in your paper 1, 2, and 3 is for the summary, where you've got 90 words limit. Okay. So these are guidelines. So don't waste time counting again and again. I sometimes see students that count they counted each line, there's a big mathematical thing happening, putting all the words. You wasted your time. You don't need to do that. Okay? if you don't stop writing also at 450 words, or you write 400 and you panic and everything else like that. If the essay is very long and you have been marked down in whatever, your teacher is correct in doing that in internal, but at the end of the year we're not guided by that in itself. If you write 700 words for a letter, let's say, you won't have enough time to answer the other one. That's the problem. So these are guidelines, if I may say so. Okay? No, don't be bound in itself. That's not when we don't. There's nothing on the rubric that says, okay, X number of words, and now we mark according to the number of words. Okay. Sometimes what happens if you write too much, you're going to make more mistakes. Okay? That's just one of the realities. But let's have a look here. So, audience, register, tone, and style. You need to be understanding of your audience. Who are you speaking to? Who are you writing to? If it says young people, then you need to make sure you're tapping into the world. If it's for teachers or adults, or, and understand your audience. The register is the type of language, level of language. It should generally be more formal, standard English to formal, not slang, colloquialisms, and so on. It's kept to minimal if it's dialogue and so on. I know there's a bit of a grey area, but we want you to aim for more the formal, and formal includes full, no contractions, so I am instead of I'm, or truncations such as lol, for laugh out loud. I know in spoken language we have that, but try to aim for more formal register and so on. Okay, and your format is important. Write down the number and the heading. Okay, that's critical and so on. The reason why you also write down the heading is that you kind of like, okay, magazine article. Okay, so there's 4 images, and as a journalist, sometimes you get a role play. So you are a person, and you should know what a journalist is, a person who's involved in newspaper, magazine, that kind of writing, to creative or professional reporting, and to audience out there, blog writers, and so on and so on. Write an article for the magazine, Choice of Life. Aha, Choice of Life. I want to highlight that, and I want to highlight journalist, and I want to highlight article. Why Choice of Life? Well, just think for a moment, what life choices do we have? So we've got one here. Happiness is around the corner, work harder. Happiness is just around the corner, earn more money. Happiness is around the corner, keep going. Okay. So, perhaps the pressures that we have, what choices? There are 4 the scenarios are the same, my apologies. It's similar characters, similar sort of situation. Okay, it looks like it's identical, so perhaps there are different ways of looking at the world. Okay? And so on. So if you do a magazine article that you must work harder, and you just leave it at that, perhaps that's not engaging with choice for life. So they ask you about your choice. What subject choice did you make to get to grade 12? You chose choices at least. Okay? You see this as, you interpret this as kind of like, okay, so maybe you've got happiness, you work harder to get to happiness. Maybe money. Maybe buying material. Maybe just keep going. So there are different ways. Perseverance, and you try to craft these scenarios into meaningful writing. Again, note the introduction and conclusion. Okay. And so on, especially for a magazine article. Start with a question. Leave with an answer. And you'll see a magazine article, and something I will talk about when looking at paper 1. But most, if not all of the comprehensions that are chosen are magazine articles. Have a look at comprehension papers and look at how sometimes the introduction and conclusion work. In fact, you're often asked on those as technical things. Let's move back to this. Okay, so these are just some ideas. Note again the keyword choice. Okay. What choice? And you try to use your maturity and your experience and of the world around you and so on. You probably should maybe have the insight that maybe always going, and like the rat race. Here we go. And that perhaps there are lots of pressures on people to do all of these things. We must persevere in order to find our own happiness. Okay, and so you're using the kind of material here. This is an excellent activity. I like this kind of thing. Okay, letter to the press. Mixed reactions to people. Okay, so in other words, mixed means like positive, well, not positive, negative. I told you not to use that, but you know what I'm saying. Like some people are angry about it, others are upset, others are kind of like indifferent or perhaps support it. So engage in activities at traffic lights to earn an income. Some people they don't like it, get a job. They say others are charitable, understand that it's not that easy just to get a job, and so on. Okay, write a letter to the press. In other words, what they also talk about, what I said earlier on, letter to the editor, it's the same thing as to the newspaper. And remember that the newspaper is not, you're not saying to the editor, you must not change, but rather you're expressing a viewpoint. Okay? And present your views on the issue. So if you write, there are mixed reactions to people you engage, and you don't actually give your view, you can't really do well in this. Okay, so you decide, okay, my view, and it says views. Okay? So I would like to imagine that, excuse me, you might have kind of like a complex reaction. You might feel that you feel really sorry for people who are homeless and have to resort to this. But maybe you feel that charity should be done through an organization. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Okay? I might struggle to answer this one personally because I find myself in a very complex space around this usually with sympathy and empathy and so on. Okay. Speech. As the winner of the Maiden Guardian's Movers and Shakers Award. So, movers and shakers. If you don't know what a mover and shaker is, you probably shouldn't answer this. But mover and shaker is someone who gets around, it's like an energetic person that can just do great things and so on. You've been invited to address a gathering of young adults. Aha, here's your audience. Now let's just unpack this. Increasingly, questions with hashtags are included. It means social media. It means you need to be working with. This thing isn't right. Okay. It means you kind of like talking about your world. Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, I think it is, Instagram, etc., etc. Okay. So, Kumi, all those kind of things. So, but hashtags. Okay. So the hashtag kind of like connection. So you need to like address your audience. Show speech like techniques. I've got about just under 5 minutes, just about 8 minutes or so left. So I'm going to quickly just go through this and then just wrap up looking at the kind of things and I've given some guiding points for each one. Speech can be really good. Make it sound like a speech. Include speech-like techniques. Have an interesting introduction and interesting conclusion. Speech is probably you can do well in this and can be really good. Book review, especially if you read books or novels, if you want to be more specific, okay, in which you express your view, your point of view, okay. And this might prove to be difficult. You'd have to give a name of the novel you've read. You've got to understand that actually we're not given all the information here, so perhaps it's and you choose and make up a novel and you write. So obviously not in Life of Pi or Dorian Gray, okay, because or Othello or something like that, because it's not going to do as well because it's lacking that complete originality. Okay, obituary is the written piece for a kind of like unexpected. Now note the word unexpectedly. So perhaps the coach was like a physically strong person and so on. So that might have those connotations. And also leading member of the organization. So this person was a wonderful leader. You present the obituary. It's a written piece. The eulogy is the spoken. Make sure it shows like it's a written element. And there are notes, loads of notes on obituaries. Dialogue. Okay, slow moving cue. Dialogue is between two people and two people need to develop an idea, rather than just mere statements that the one says and the other one says. Okay, so again, note the rules for dialogue. Let's have a look now at just some ideas that we could have done here, and so on for this. This is from here, sorry, magazine article. The article could focus on pursuit of happiness, the rat race. Okay, as I've said, okay, appropriate style and structure. So you should have notes on magazine article writing. Okay, so just use your formats and use your, again, I would also the pursuit of happiness, the rat race, and also choice, because it says choice for life, and that should be central, that there are different choices, there are different pressures, there are different things we can add in. Format, headline, byline is the 4 minutes left. Byline is the name of the writer. Don't include your name, obviously. Make up a name, okay? We don't want you to do that. So, letter to the press, okay? So, could have mixed reactions, whatever, but could support the idea of trying to or comment on the intrusive behavior of the people, and so on. But again, your view needs to be clear, and it should come through in your introduction, and you develop it accordingly. Okay? And format is very, very important. Own address. You need to include that. You can't just leave out your address and your name. Make up a name. Because imagine writing a letter and especially to the press, you have to, it's by law, you are required to give your own name. Otherwise, that letter won't be published. Okay? Let's move to the next speech. The speech should encourage young adults to develop a moral conscience. Okay, structure, opening, closing, speech-like techniques, and so on. And again, young adults, and you're tapping into the world of social media. That's part of the context. Okay? Again, speech-like techniques need to be used. Review. You could disagree or agree with all the scathing, accept mixed responses. Format, title, author, genre. Give those things out. Make it clear. And you say, this novel, Charlie and the Hamster, going on a rat race, in the pursuit of happiness, written by Joseph, and the genre is self-help, and then you give criticism. You can do well in it, and you show an understanding of that. Okay? Again, a review is quite a specific thing. Make sure you understand the formats and the technicalities. Okay, obituary shown as opposed to an eulogy. We say this again and again, and candidates often get this one wrong. Okay, the coach's contribution, and wider as I said. And then just to finish off, the dialogue should reflect an unexpected development. Okay, relevant to when you're standing in a queue. So not like something weird and crazy and everything else like that. Use dialogue formats. Dialogue, big word, interlocutors, two people conversing and engaging with each other. Okay? So I say to you in a speech, no, how are you? I understand that you had a very difficult time. Yes, I had a very difficult time. I lost my job due to financial pressure around COVID. Then the next speaker then says, that is really terrible, losing your job. I'm sorry to hear that. Not like, okay, so tell me about what you're doing next year. So you're not engaging. Okay? That's very, very important. Make sure that dialogue has that kind of feel to it, and obviously the suitable dialogue format is relevant. Okay, so I'm going to finish up on that. Good luck for your exams. I hope this presentation kind of gave you some approaches towards your understanding and insights, and helped you with some skills and things that you can take with you for exam preparation. But remember, it's hard work, solid work. Read your literature carefully, read the book, and practice paper 3, practice